what I'm looking at is how exposure to Deepwater Horizon oil may have impacted how marine animals can mount a stress response. And this work was kind of inspired by some work done in 2010 by Lori Schwacke's group on dolphins. And they found that when they herded up the dolphins and took blood samples, they didn't have high levels of a stress hormone called cortisol. And this is unusual because when you're rounding up dolphins and taking blood samples, it's a stressful experience. And the reason you have a stress response is to help you survive that stressful experience. So that they didn't have high levels of cortisol was problematic and was kind of indicative of an inability to cope with potential stressors, which can impact health and fitness. So we're using toadfish to try to figure out what went wrong with the dolphins.
Okay.
And we're exposing toadfish to different, very low actually, low environmentally realistic concentrations of Deepwater Horizon oil. And for 7 days is one of our experiments, and then we'll look at recovery for 7 days. And we both look at whether being in polluted water is a stressful experience. So are there elevated cortisol levels in response to being exposed to PAHs that are in the water? And we're also taking our toadfish that have been exposed and giving them a simulated predation stress and seeing if they're able to increase cortisol levels. Much like the dolphins in herding them up, they were unable to have high cortisol levels. We want to see if toadfish are able to have high cortisol levels in response to a stress. So we've only been working on this since last January, so we're kind of part of that last group of funding. Okay. And we've done a full 7-day exposure and recovery, and we've started a 28-day exposure now, and we're going to do a 28-day recovery. And what I guess the highlights are, to date, we have found that being in a contaminated environment is not stressful, but toadfish, after 7 days exposure, have a problem with mounting a stress response. And that problem doesn't go away after being in clean water for 7 days. We're finding this is in response to very low pH levels in the water, just above detection levels, okay, essentially. And so our future work is now looking at what the mechanism is behind that. What is going wrong with respect to cortisol secretion? And cortisol secretion is kind of a very complicated thing, and it involves like multiple steps and lots of transporters and enzymes and substrate. And so we're looking at these individual things to figure out what the problem is. Well, I think our findings are helping inform us about marine animals and marine animal health in the environment, and what the issues are when marine mammals or marine fish are exposed to Deepwater Horizon oil, and what we should be looking for. If you see an impairment, and we seem to, other groups have found it in marine mammals, and now we're seeing it in our toadfish, an impairment in the stress response due to oil exposure, that means that there are going to be potentially population level effects, because cortisol controls the immune system, it controls reproduction, it controls social behaviors. So I think our work is helping to inform what the potential impacts on marine life are going to be. Even I'm looking at cortisol, right, and the perception of stress. But there are groups that are looking at other things that could be impacting cortisol release as well. And so when it comes to trying to find maybe a biomarker or an indicator that animals have been exposed to PAHs, an impairment in the stress response could be one of those things. If you're finding, in the case of marine mammals, for example, you can't just experiment on marine mammals and look at their tissues on a live animal kind of thing. But if you're rounding up dolphins and you're seeing this impairment in the ability to secrete cortisol, you're going to automatically know potentially that this animal has been exposed to PAHs. And because we're seeing that it persists, so they're not recovering from this. It could be that within some time, we can only really say within 7 days, they've seen oil and there is some impairment. I think in general, it just helps, information is key. It's going to help us inform, we're informing ourselves on what the potential indicators are of exposure. And we'll have the insight to figure out what we can do about it.